Pour one out for the latest victim of the layoff curse, Foursquare. As of last week, the 15-year-old company has one less leg to stand on. Foursquare was a bastion of 2010's social media. Founded in March 2009, it came to be incontrovertibly a titan, one of the few which burst into the multi-million mark, peaking beyond 13 million active users way back in 2012. Somehow, if these statistics are to be trusted, in 2023, it still has 55 million active monthly users. In its heyday, it was in the middle of an entirely new category of social media, social location sharing, or perhaps better termed location tracking, an industry that has many a familiar face. Take, for example, the two-collar guy right here. That's right, that's Sam Altman, Mr. OpenAI himself, discussing the launch of the iOS app for his 2005 Y Combinator-backed startup Looped. Long before he was at the helm of the AI gold rush, Sam Altman was lambasted for this particular look, which also clearly became the inspiration for an infamous Foursquare badge. Looped, at first, was a phone-first platform for sharing your location with others. Very much in the same category of what we now know as Find My, but what was originally called Find My Friends by Apple themselves. Founded a couple of years before Foursquare, Looped was very early in the mobile location space. As this article describes, it actually made deals with carriers to get its app on their platform, back when that was essential. With, at one point, the advertising tagline, "Where you at?" in collaboration with Boost Mobile.
Hey, yo, where you at?
Man, you know where I'm at.
I know where you at, and you know where I'm at.
Oh, you know where I'm at.
Oh, you see where I'm at?
Yeah, but I know where you at.
Boost Looped with GPS. Now you know where your friends are at.
Looped was a project of Stanford sophomores, Sam Altman and Nick Sevo, and Altman's childhood friends, Rick and Tom Pernikoff. Looped was pretty successful, but as alternatives like Foursquare entered the scene in 2009 and practically instantly rocketed to fame, Looped pivoted from the Find My style to check-ins. After all, this was the big new thing, the killer app to close out the decade. As described during 2012's South by Southwest in Austin, Texas, those kinds of apps are the new darlings of tech. Unsurprisingly, just as Altman's stay at OpenAI has been embroiled with controversy, sometimes overblown, sometimes surprisingly real, so was Looped. Whereas OpenAI has been the target of existential dread on one hand, as one of countless startups dangerously plowing ahead in this space, it's pretty clear it's also done very specific bad things. Most recently, it illegally used Scarlett Johansson's likeness in its new ChatGPT 4o release, with the uncanny Sky voice. Although Altman would refute this claim, it's pretty obvious, especially when considering this perhaps misguided tweet from Altman himself.
ChatGPT has released a new voice assistant feature inspired by Scarlett Johansson's AI character in Her.
Before that, Altman was president of Y Combinator from 2014 to 2019, the same now prestigious incubator that had first backed Loop. And again, his stay was dripped in controversy, as highlighted in this article discussing his ousting and return spiral at OpenAI that graced headlines last year. Altman left Y Combinator not by choice, but because he was asked to leave by his mentor as part of a pattern of clashes that some attribute to his self-serving approach. Big surprise. Rewind to over 15 years ago. Looped, right out of the gate, shortly after that wwdc presentation in 2008, foreshadowed Altman's magnetism for danger. As reported in July, Justine said in a phone interview that she apparently spammed her friends with phone invitations to Looped, even though she never intended to send any out. That was clearly a huge privacy concern. Although Looped claimed it was a UI issue. That's hardly an excuse. Dark patterns are dark patterns, after all, and they were still completely responsible. Thankfully, on July 16th, Altman himself wrote in the company blog, "Sorry everyone, our bad." If you couldn't guess, his language was buttered with marketing speak and those kinds of Silicon Valley CEO-isms. But the previous post from July 15th was from the Looped team, and not Altman specifically, and started with, "A couple of folks have recently blogged that Looped automatically spams your contacts. We wanted to let everyone know that 1. We apologize for the confusion in unintended invites, and 2. This issue has been fixed." So that makes it all better, right? But even in the comments of this post, people complained about another serious spammy situation, saying Looped's SMS service isn't responding to the conventional stop keyword. And on top of that, people were getting invites from total strangers. All of this coming the same day of the Altman apology. It should come as no surprise then that just like with Y Combinator and OpenAI, allegedly the Looped board tried to fire Altman twice due to deceptive and chaotic behavior. Yet, regardless of drama, Loop in many ways prevailed. It raised nearly $40 million over 7 years and was acquired for reportedly $43.3 million in 2012. Truly, Altman presents as a capitalist, a Silicon Valley icon, for all the glory and all the baggage that implies. Which leads us back to Foursquare. In 2012, as Looped closed, Foursquare was arguably as popular as ever. Although the public hasn't really had a peek into Foursquare's funding since its $150 million round 5 years ago, in 2019, it's estimated to have raised at least a lifetime total of $400 million. And I think 2012 really was its most recognizable era. Part of that is because in 2014, Foursquare would split off its app into 2 different projects. Foursquare from then on would lean more into the business side of things, the Yelp competition side, but then its new project Swarm would try to take over that social, life-logging side of things. So, I ask the question, without these location-sharing darlings in Foursquare as their sort of flag bearer, would we have the location-focused features that we find across almost all social media platforms today? I doubt it. From Pokemon Go to Snapchat Map, there's a whole lot of groundwork that was laid by these all-too-forgotten grandparents of the 2010s social media era. It seems that Foursquare might be falling from the 4 corners of the earth to the annals of digital history. Thankfully, its legacy will live on in so many different forms. So although we may never be back to high school check-in mayors and hyper-local marketing, will still have its descendants, and even maybe Swarm itself, and all of its influences across even first-party apps. Yes, it feels like we'll always be in that age-old cycle of Sherlocking. Apple's Journal already uses locations to trigger entries. Google Maps and every other platform like it begs for your memories in the form of engagementable reviews. Foursquare was part of an app-centric boom. Just as Google was part of the .com boom, Apple was part of the personal computing and smartphone boom, and Facebook part of that first social media boom. The story of Foursquare in the location-sharing ecosystem is rich with details and ripples all throughout the last decade. To understand some of these intricacies, we need to step into stories of the mobile internet age, when we only just realized that the internet was something different and would be forever now that it could be in the palm of our hands. From beige IBMs to glass-coated touchscreens. As the 2010s turned into the 2020s, we crossed the threshold. No longer is the internet just a place of the office or the home. We're on the mobile internet. Everywhere. That's right, apparently if you're watching this on a TV or a computer, you're apparently doing something nostalgic. And before we get a little bit more into that, I just wanted to say thanks for coming by. Make sure to leave your thoughts down below, as well as your memories, your hot takes, anything that comes to mind. And sure, a like and a subscribe would mean a whole lot too. Today, the internet is driven by mobile. At first, it was inconceivable. The mobile web, at one point, was a sliced-up, pared-down version. A kind of internet that was near unusable. Not only that, but it could be pretty expensive to access. Email was a luxury. A flagship feature of business-targeted hardware like BlackBerry. Texting, even if it was designed specifically to be virtually free, reportedly costing just a third of a penny for the carriers to transmit on the cell infrastructure. It was definitely not automatically included in most plans. Hell, this was still the time of the pager, also affectionately known as the beeper. And no, I'm not talking about the controversial messaging app that battled with Apple just last year, but these little black rectangles that literally beeped from your belt loop.
With a little bit of gold in a pager. With a little bit.
By the end of the aughts, the strongest pull for new surfers of the internet was undeniably the breaking waves of social networks. And social networking was much more than just a flex or a hobby. Social media participants present a highly curated version of themselves. At first using digital objects, photos, videos, and self-descriptions. These construct and reflect a version of the self. Identity is the outcome of performances, in which the actors provide an impression of the self. Ultimately, like an all-consuming ARG and capitalism sandwich, social networking sites offer new front-stage ways for people to present themselves to others and keep a particular narrative going. Certain individuals, for instance, consider their identity and self-presentation as being akin to a brand, which they can then maintain through various sites. This, for all its risks, for all its attention-stealing, personality-conflating pressure, was driven by the baseline human motivation. The motivation to be social animals, to be storytellers. Yes, it might have started from the opposite of where it ended up, as by creating, sharing, and exchanging information, social and locational, users felt a sense of commonality among a group of friends in a public space. So as the 2000s stretched into the 2010s, it became powerfully clear that not only would we be shepherded by social networks, but by that unavoidable form factor of mobile. Mobile would not only bring the existing networks closer to the day-to-day lives of its users, it would grant instant access to new types of sharing that wouldn't have been feasible or even interesting on form factors like desktop, especially location sharing and even to a degree real-time media. A significant aspect of the mobile web is the overlaying of the physical world with digital information. This hybrid space suggests the potential for a different kind of engagement with locative information, just as it suggests new ways of constructing identity. And it was all but inevitable, as three things were clear heading into the 2010s. 1. Most people will experience the internet for the first time ever on a phone. And so the first time people experience social media will also be on a phone, which means social media has and will keep making mobile first. Which brings us back again to Foursquare, and with it a new distortion of our identities, new avenues for self-construction, for better and for worse, for the spatial self of this postmodern era. Foursquare clicked with its near-mainstream user base remarkably fast. By 2012, it had rocketed practically to the highest tier of social media at the time, pushing top-level networks like Facebook to premiere their own comparable services. In this case, Facebook emerged as a competitor with its new offering Places. In response, Foursquare founder Dennis Crowley mused, "Look what happened when Facebook got into Twitter's space. People said Twitter was gone, but it just made Twitter stronger and more focused. Just like today with Instagram Reels, and just about everyone else. Waging fisticuffs with TikTok in the short-form space, the result is rarely conquest. Instead, as some would say, all ships rise. Honestly, as much as things stay the same, it's bizarre how different the landscape really is, even if populated with such familiar faces and brands. I mean, it's too easy to forget that Twitter's Vine pretty much laid the bricks in the city hall of short-form music-backed For You page content. And now, from Reels to Threads, Facebook/Instagram is trying to divert the channels from the overflowing Twitter exodus. In this case, although perhaps as a monstrous lifeboat, rather than a death blow. But yes, back to Foursquare in the year 2012. At that time, it had become one of the most popular location-based social networks, or LBSNs, made possible by the fusion of Web 2.0 applications and the underlying technology of geo-referencing. After its launch in 2009, it only took Foursquare 1 year to get 1 million users. 3 months after that, it hit 2 million. And in June of 2010, it closed a $20 million Series B funding round. By August, it blew past 3 million users, with apparently 180,000 users joining every 10 days. As described in this research paper on the obvious privacy ramifications of this juxtaposition of social media and location triangulation, entitled "We Know Where You Live," it has been recently reported that Foursquare has a history of around 2 billion visits from its users around the world. Foursquare gives incentives to its users. Its overall goal revolves around location sharing, while users accumulate awards for visiting specific places in the system. And besides that gamification aspect, Foursquare has massively invested into the recommendation aspect, allowing users to leave notes or tips about their experiences at specific places. Ultimately, this fueled a generation of quasi-competition to become the mayor of your school, the top visitor to your local coffee shop, and a proto-influencer in the location sphere, which obviously came with some sacrifices. That information could reveal a lot about each user. Easy availability of information about the location of a user raises several concerns about privacy violation. The question is, despite being a private data that a user may choose not to reveal, can we still infer the home city of a user on Foursquare from the Foursquare interactions of tips, mayorships, and duns? Well, to spoil the suspense, the answer is essentially yes. The results indicate that one can easily infer the home city of around 78 8% of the analyzed users within 50 kilometers. Yikes. With all that in mind, let's just take a moment to reminisce, not just about the scary, privacy-skirting implications of Foursquare, even though, yes, it's essential to remember that part too, but let's take an intermission. I mean, just look at one of these original UIs from the 2010s. Foursquare was a concept that I myself fell in love with, because it made me feel like I was building something. The gratification of the gamified user experience kept me excited to pull out my phone for every check-in. The thought that my daily actions would be interesting if captured in this particular way was addicting. As I've talked about in previous episodes, content creation brings about a certain mindset. A mindset that if you're doing something, that something may be full of content potential. Like the potential energy of a kid on top of a slide. Sometimes just a regular night out turns into a ripe opportunity full of kinetic energy. All it takes is a push. Location-based networks were quite a powerful push, letting us produce content out of what were seemingly ordinary, unremarkable moments. Foursquare capitalized on that, turning us all into micro-influencers of our towns, of our schools, of our cafes. I won't lie, it was pretty great, even though, in retrospect, it was little more than just another cunning plan to drive engagement. In today's environment, it's becoming more and more clear that these networks are careful constructions that, although we make the best of them, need us to survive. They influence our identities and work their way into our day-to-day mentality. And yet, we rarely have control of what happens after we start using them. As I've touched on, Foursquare was but one in a crowd. Although it's still standing, albeit a bit more broken than it was last month, its influence was big, both on its users and on a then massive brand new industry. It was at the epicenter of a social networking boom, the next big thing. As it helped to define the identities of its users, it represented a significant milestone in the evolution of the internet itself. Combining the web with the breakthrough tech of smartphones and location tracking, something that used to be impossible to imagine. But who else was there? If Foursquare was at the center, what other apps and concepts entered into the mix during this internet era? Well, in the next episode, let's run through a couple similar ideas. Some that you might have heard from in the tales of yesterdecade. Not only that, but I wanted to include some tidbits about a little company called Niantic. Foursquare was praised and also decried for its gamification of location sharing. Well, those of us using a smartphone in 2016 are all too familiar with a different kind of location sharing gamification boom. It goes by the name of Pokemon Go. Funny, it may have even been inspired in part by a clever Google Maps April Fool's joke from 2014. It took until 2016 for Pokemon Go to be officially announced, and that timeline is actually way more reasonable than it sounds on the surface. That's because Go was built on top of a different, deeply nerdy, foundational ARG-like experience. But we'll get to that. All that and more in the next one. So before I make this episode twice as long, I hope you join me for all of that in part 3, coming as soon as I can get it out there. I know, sometimes it just feels like we're scratching the surface. But I promise we'll keep digging deeper and deeper to find all the good stuff. So again, thanks for joining me today. Definitely check out my previous videos if you liked this one at all, especially the last episode, if you're interested in that kind of digital history. And yes, as promised, I'll be spelunking back into the depths of Minecraft mods and jailbreak tweaks soon. But not quite yet. In the meantime, I really wanted to explore and expand on the universe of Foursquare and 2010's social media, since I only just lightly covered it in the last episode. As you can tell, there really was a whole lot more to cover, and still is, and it felt like a better idea to investigate that thoroughly before we explored something entirely different. So I hope you enjoyed, and don't forget to leave your comments down below, or wherever YouTube is throwing the comments section nowadays. Cheers.